Hey guys, welcome back to How to Roll Dice. I'm Josh, and I'm currently trapped behind this massive wall of board games that I have gathered over the holidays. This is just going to be a quick little holiday game haul. I'm not trying to flex on anybody as far as like what I got versus what you got. I'm just really excited about all of these new games and wanted to show them to you guys and also prove that I haven't just been screwing around and stop making videos entirely. I'm actually working on a review right now for Gravwell. But I wanted to put something up just to say, hey, I'm alive. I had a great holiday. I hope you did too. Isn't it fun that the year is over and we can move into the next one? And just show some of this stuff off to you guys and talk about what I've gotten to play so far, what I haven't, and just the games in general, as well as some gaming components that I got. So jumping into these real quick, my sister got me these. This is a custom 3D printed token tray with a rainbow color pattern to it. You can see that there. She actually had this printed from a gentleman on Etsy. And when he asked what color she thought I would like, she said, well, I have kind of a loud personality, so what do you have that might match that? And he said, well, I can just set the printer to all colors and it'll just spit out this kind of like mishmash rainbow. And so she was happy to go with that. And I think it's actually really cool. It's got this like rainbow gradient effect to it. We've used this for a couple games so far, primarily for Spirit Island, which I'll talk about in a minute. And it works really well. Basically, if you have a game where all of the players need to have access to a specific group of tokens, or there's just a lot of tokens to a game and you don't feel like sticking them in all in different piles scattered all over the place, this works really nicely. There is a couple of drawbacks to it. If you have a game with maybe something like money tokens that need to be put available to all players and the board is really large and needs to be in the center, so you create a couple of stacks on one side and a couple of stacks on the other side, rather than having players reach over or ask people to pass them tokens. Obviously, this won't work unless you have a couple of them, because not everybody will be able to reach this tray, just like not everybody would be able to reach the same main stacks of tokens. You have to sort of split them up. But other than that, this is really cool and it works really well, and I'm glad that I have it. Next up, she got me these really awesome meeple coasters. These are cork coasters with, I believe, a laser burned logo on them. So you can see the different sort of like gaming meeples. We have the heart one here. We have this cool like diamond pattern, which I'm sure is from a game that I just haven't played yet or don't recognize. We've got a labyrinth or a maze pattern there. We've got this hex one, which is really cool. So I have 8 of those. There are 4 different patterns, so 2 each. And those are nifty. I always just have them out on the table now whenever we're playing. If somebody comes in with a can of soda or a glass of water or something, I just have to toss it on one of those. Even though my entire tabletop is basically one giant coaster, that's the material that I have on top of it, I don't mind having these because they're actually really cool, and I think it adds a little bit of flair and fun to the gaming table. Then we've got this guy right here, Hella 90s Pop Culture Trivia Game. I have not gotten to play this yet, but it's basically a pop culture party game where everybody is answering trivia questions based around the 90s. My sister and I grew up in the 90s. I actually got this from her, I should say. So these two and this were from my sister. We grew up in the 90s, and so I'm sure a lot of the stuff in here is going to have a really fun, vintage, sentimental vibe to it and get a lot of interesting conversations going about things we remember from growing up. I'm actually going to move these off the table because I'm going to start running out of space if I don't create some as we go. So I'll place these right down here on the floor. Next up, we have Spirit Island, which my wife got me as a gift. This is currently number 12 on Board Game Geek and is a great game with a really fun, unique theme to it and a really cool design visually as far as the art and the pieces go. Fully cooperative game with the concept, or I should say 1 to 4 players, 90 to 120 minutes long, with the concept that you and the other players are playing island spirits, actual like spirits, elementals almost, attempting to fight off colonists who are attempting to explore and colonize the island, and in doing so will wipe out the native people, the Dahan. This is a really fun inversion of what you would have in most games where you are playing as the colonists or the explorers or the settlers, and you're attempting to move into this new land or this new country and set up your shops and your buildings and clear forests and plant crops and things like that without even really giving much thought to who was already there or may have already been there and valued the land that you're now just taking over and doing what you want with. Not to get too heavy-handed into that kind of a discussion, but this game handles it in a very fun but pointed kind of way. The only issue that I have with this game so far is that it is extremely difficult not to learn or to really play through, but to win. It's a fully cooperative game, like I said, for 1 to 4 players, and I have played it with 2, 3, and 4 players at this point and have not come anywhere close to winning. Anywhere close. When I first played this game with my wife and I, we started with 2 of the easier spirits, and we were using basically the intro rules. There were several different options that we could have added into the game that we left out because they supposedly added to difficulty. So we thought we would just sort of cruise through, we'd get the rules down pat, we'd get a good feel for it, and maybe it would take a little longer than expected, but we would win. No. After 2 hours, we had only made it 3 rounds into the game, and the game has a hard stop at 12 rounds. And after 3 rounds, we were so far behind beating the game, like stopping the colonists, we just called it. We had no chance at all. And it's not like we got any of the rules wrong. I went back and checked it. And it's not like we were strategizing poorly. According to reviews I've watched online, we were using good strategy. It's just that the game is that hard to beat. And again, we were playing beginner level spirits, so the easiest to work with against the easiest possible setup you can use for the game, and we had no chance. We played it again with my sister and her fiance, and then my wife and I, so 4 players. And again, we went with the easiest to use spirits against the easiest setup for the game. And after about 3 hours, we had made it maybe 2/3 of the way through the game, but we were so far behind, it was clear we had absolutely no chance of winning. And again, we were following the rules correctly. We didn't have anything messed up. I went and checked online for the commonly screwed up rules. Not that the game's that complicated, but there are some that you could mix up, and we didn't have any wrong. And again, we seemed to be using the strategies that people were recommending online. It's just a very hard game. So I'm certainly going to continue to play it, and I want to get to the point where I can beat it, more than I lose at it, regardless of who I'm playing with. Have some kind of a strategy I can hand out to the group and sort of walk people through it if it's their first time, or just let everybody do their own thing if they're experienced with it. Definitely want to keep playing it, definitely want to get better at it, but fair warning, very difficult to win at. Lots of fun to play, but by the end of it, your brain is feeling a little tired, and you may be a little frustrated and feeling like you've never had a chance to begin with, which may or may not be intentional considering the scenario that they're attempting to emulate in the game. Moving on. This is a game that my mother gave me and is currently 4th on the Board Game Geek overall ratings list. This is Terraforming Mars. This is a great game for 1 to 5 players that I have played now probably half a dozen times and have enjoyed more and more every time. This is a game where players are acting as corporations who have moved to the planet Mars and are attempting to do what corporations do, make money and produce things. But if in doing so, they should happen to accidentally partially terraform Mars for the better by increasing the temperature or adding oxygen to the atmosphere or developing oceans, they get some points for that. On top of that, they're going to be getting points for cards that they play, for goods that they produce, for actions that they take. There's a lot of cubes involved in this game, a lot of colored cubes, a lot of metallic cubes of different sizes and colors. And it's just a lot of fun. It's cooperative in a way because you're all working towards the end goal of terraforming Mars. You're trying to get down a certain number of oceans and get the oxygen to a certain level and the temperature to a certain level. But at the same time, you're trying to focus on making yourself the most successful corporation while those other things go on. So it's competitive, but also cooperative. It's interesting and it's a lot of fun, and I've really enjoyed playing it. So I would definitely recommend giving it a shot if you can, and I will likely be having a review for this out first out of all of these games because I've played it the most so far. Moving on. After we wrapped up our little personal tight family Christmas at our house, we moved over to my wife's house, and we do a little Secret Santa there, and she apparently gave the same sort of shopping instructions to her brother, and so my brother-in-law got me a Feast for Odin, which is currently also relatively high on the board game list here. Let's see, Feast for Odin is at 22. So, solid option there. This is a game by Uwe Rosenberg. This is the same developer and designer who created Agricola as well as Caverna, the Cave Farmers, both 2 games that I really enjoy, and it has a similar style from what I've seen. I haven't gotten a chance to play it yet, but this is a game for 1 to 4 players, and in the same vein as Agricola and Caverna, you're attempting to sort of place your workers in order to take actions to produce goods and to develop your own ability to produce goods, both at a faster rate and more efficiently throughout the course of the game, except this adds in a unique feature. You're going to be doing those things, but also playing a massive game of Tetris at the same time. Basically, there's a giant grid on your player board. It's something like, similar to something like 100 squares. I want to say it's 10 or 12 by 10 or 12 squares. And all of the goods and pieces that you purchase and produce and develop have to fit onto that grid. So picture the actual tokens, instead of maybe being little wooden tokens, are cardboard punch-outs like you have in a lot of games for money coins. And these are going to have a very specific shape so that when you place them onto that grid, they take up a certain number of squares. And then all of the other things that you produce going forward, you want to fit into that grid in a way that you cover as many squares as possible without leaving any blanks, but also fitting them in with existing items. And I'm not even sure if you can shift items around once you've placed them. So placement is very important. So it's also got a massive number of things that you can produce and build and purchase. So it's not like Caverna, where there's vegetables, and then there's grain, and then there's livestock and dogs, and maybe one or two other, there's ore, there's rubies, there's a handful of things you can produce, wood, coal, but maybe we're talking 8, 12 things. This looks like it has 50 to 100 options of things that you can produce and fit onto your board. So far more development, far more advanced in the scale of it, but by a designer that I'm familiar with, and it seems to be in the same veins as his other work, so very excited to give that a try. Also, just a heavy box. I mean, this is very hard to pick up one-handed, not just because the grip that it requires is large, but it weighs, I mean, this has to be close to 10 pounds. It's impressive. Moving right down the line. We now have Concordia. This is the first game that I picked up for myself. On top of the games that I received, I actually received about $250 in local game store certificates. I'm actually going to put this off to the side because this box is just massive, and I'll basically look like I'm just speaking to you over a strange cardboard fence. This is the first game that I picked up with those gift certificates to my local gaming store, which I will shout out really quickly. My current absolute favorite local gaming store, I'm based out of Massachusetts, about somewhere in central Mass, is in Nashua, New Hampshire, and it's called The Comic Store, plain and simple. They have a gigantic collection of board games, both new and old, and they also have a gigantic collection of comics, both new and old, with some spicy stuff thrown in the middle, like Gundam models and Funko Pop collectibles and all kinds of other stuff, high-end sculptures if you're into that type of things, DC, Marvel, all that stuff. They've got it. It's a great store. So popped over there and ended up grabbing Concordia. This is currently, I want to say, let's look here, 18th on the overall Board Game Geeks ranking list. This is a great game. I've played this 3 or 4 times now. It's for 2 to 5 players. It takes place in the Mediterranean about 2,000 years ago inside of the Roman Empire, and has players taking on the role of traveling, exploring merchants who are attempting to build their mercantile routes and set up storehouses and produce goods all over the Roman Empire, Libya, Asia, Europe, Egypt, Britannia, Germania, obviously Italy, Gallia, which is France, Dacia, which is kind of where Romania is now. Have very few qualms with this game, have really enjoyed playing it. This may be the next review after I go through and do Terraforming Mars, possibly and Spirit Island. This will probably be up next. I've had a lot of fun with this. I've really enjoyed it. The only qualm that I have with this game so far is that it's very historically accurate, which normally I like. That was very Boston of me, normally. Normally I like. However, they chose to go with a semi-Roman alphabet. It's not true like Latin alphabet, but they use like V's instead of U's. And on top of that, because they're using the historically accurate names for all of the regions, like Dacia and Gallia and Britannia. Obviously, Britannia is kind of easy, but Hellas for Greek and Gallia for France, Hispania for Spain. Obviously, some are easier than others. It makes it a little difficult to follow where you are and get kind of your head around the map. And then on top of that, when they switch the lettering out and then you're sitting on the wrong side of the board, so everything is upside down, it's like, okay, you're calling it by a name I don't recognize it as, and you're writing it in an alphabet I'm not familiar with, and it's upside down. I'm having a hard time. But other than that, I love how historically accurate it is. I love the fact that it comes with a separate pamphlet that has no rules in it, that just explains the history of all these regions, how they functioned, how they became part of the Roman Empire, and what they're known as now. It's just a really cool game overall. I've really enjoyed it. And it's in a giant box. Moving on down the list, the next game that I purchased for myself is Viticulture, the Essential Edition. So this is a game that has been out for a while and has been re-released, sort of remastered as the Essential Edition. And they had somebody come in and sort of handpick which components of the original they wanted to carry into this newly, finely tuned edition of the game. And guess who they had do that? It was actually none other than Uwe Rosenberg, who developed, again, A Feast for Odin and Caverna and Agricola. And so this is a great game that has been touched by a great designer, and I was very excited to pick it up, and was very excited to learn upon picking it up, because again, I'm sort of just going off of the top 100 list for all of my latest purchases, trying to bring in some more widely popularized games so that I get a feel for what people like and what people don't like versus what I like and what I don't like. And for the most part, if hundreds of thousands of people have played a game and love it, it's probably a good game. So this is currently 23rd on the Board Game Geek overall rating list. And when I went to go pick it up, I grabbed the box off the shelf and went, wait a minute, this is made by Stonemaier Games, the same company that makes Wingspan and Scythe. I love Wingspan and Scythe. And I love that this game already, though I've just pulled out the rulebook and given it a quick flip through, feels and looks just like those games. The rulebook is printed on that same luxurious textured paper as Wingspan. All of the boards are beautifully illustrated. I love the art style. The theme is that players are attempting to become the most successful and popular vineyard in Tuscany, in sort of like not historical Tuscany, but old world Tuscany. You're going to be planting grapes, you're going to be harvesting grapes, you're going to be turning them into wines and storing them and selling them and inviting tasters and guests to your vineyard in order to raise your popularity. And you're going to be doing this against up to 5 other players, because it's a 1 to 6 player game that takes 45 to 90 minutes. Have not gotten to play it yet, though I am very excited to play it. Anything out of Stonemaier I'm sure is going to be great, and anything that has been in any way touched by Uwe Rosenberg is also going to be great, so I can't see how this isn't going to end up being a winner. Also, I like games that can pull people in that aren't necessarily part of the gaming community, but they are into maybe some more mature things like wine. So if I ever wanted to play a game with like my wife's mother or my mother or some aunts or uncles, I can probably whip this out, so the sophisticated type folk, and go, this is a game about Tuscan vineyards and producing lovely wines. Who wants to play? And then they get introduced to Stonemaier Games, which is just a spectacular company. It's probably a bit more complex than you would want to use for a bare beginner's game, but we'll find out when I actually get to play it. Very excited for this one. So that again was one that I picked up myself from the comic store. Next up, we have Star Wars Rebellion, the third game that I picked up, also from the comic store. This is by Fantasy Flight Games. It says it's for 2 to 4 players, but I really feel like it's a 2-player game. If you're doing 4 players, I'm gonna guess it's teams, because this is straight up the Empire versus the Rebellion across the galaxy in the Star Wars setting. If you've played any of the Star Wars games from Fantasy Flight, you'll know that they have varying levels of scale as to how zoomed in on the battle you are. So for example, Imperial Assault is an RPG system where one player takes on the role of the NPCs and the enemy warriors and soldiers, and the other players take on the role of individual characters that develop as you play through the game, like Gloomhaven or like Descent or many other games that are out there. So that would be probably the closest that you could zoom in. It's a small group of people in a single specific encounter each time you sit down to play the game. Then you pull out from that a bit and you get something like X-Wing, where instead of individuals, in a small single encounter, you're going to be controlling several fighter planes inside of a massive dogfight. So it might be 2 or 3 ships versus 2 or 3 ships, maybe a handful of X-Wings versus a handful of TIE fighters. And that's going to be the game. So you've backed out from the close zoomed in planet fight and you're now part of a dogfight in space. If you backed out again from that, you might get something like Star Wars Armada, which I have the ships for back here on my shelf. Even though I've only gotten to play it a handful of times, I really love the scale and design of the ships. I think they look really cool. That is an entire fleet battle. So you're going to have several flagships, each with dozens of fighters that you're going to be controlling versus another player who has the same. So instead of being zoomed into that individual dogfight, you've now got not hundreds, but dozens of planes on the board with many dogfights and huge flagships firing volleys of cannons in the background, things like that. Zoom out even farther to the entire galaxy and you're going to have Star Wars Rebellion. You're going to have dozens of planets across multiple star systems, each with fleet battles and ground fights and massive, encounters going on that you're going to be interacting with back and forth throughout the rounds of the game. The Empire is going to be hunting down the Rebellion, and the Rebellion is going to be hiding their home base while continuing to work on their actual goals of overthrowing and dissolving the Empire so that they can push freedom back across the galaxy. From what I've read, it's a very crunchy game. It's got a lot of rules. It's not the type of game where you're going to know all of the Rebels rules and all of the Empire's rules so that you can always tell what your opponent could do at any given point. You're basically going to try to learn just enough rules to get yourself going, and everything that your opponent does is going to kind of be a surprise for the most part until you've played the game many, many times. This also is a pretty honkin' box, both in thickness and in weight. Come on, camera. There you go. but I think it's going to be well worth it. I'm very excited to pick it up. So far, this has been the most expensive game that I've picked up this season. This was $100 for the box. But Fantasy Flight tends to put a premium on their games, but they also have to tend to have premium quality to their games, so I don't mind it so much. And then my last purchase actually just happened about 3 or 4 hours ago, and it was this guy right here, Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. This is, and I picked it up at Target actually, but this represents the last of my holiday game spending money. So everything after this will just be me buying games, probably 1 or 2 a month. So this is set in the same location, or is based in the same setting as Gloomhaven, which is currently the #1 ranked game overall on Board Game Geek. Actually, I forgot to mention, Rebellion is currently ranked number 8. Let me do a quick check on that so that I'm not lying to you guys. Rebellion is currently ranked number 8. So far we haven't even gotten out of the top 25 as far as games that I've picked up. And this will not break that because currently Jaws of the Lion is ranked at 14th. Which is why I picked it up, and it was available at Target. It is based in the Gloomhaven setting. Gloomhaven, the full-size game, is currently #1 on Board Game Geek and has been there since about 2017 when it came out. Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion is a modified version of the RPG system that they use in that game that revolves mostly around cards on a slightly smaller scale, but still has all of the grandeur and the customization and uniqueness of the Gloomhaven full-size game. Gloomhaven, the full-size game, costs about $120, I think. This costs $50 and is in a much smaller box and has room for 1 to 4 players against an AI sort of event NPC monster deck. So everybody actually gets to play as a character and enjoy the game. And it comes with lots of components. Again, very heavy, chunky box, surprisingly heavy for how large it is when you actually go to pick it up. Have not gotten to play this yet. Picked this up because last week during my Friday night gaming session, we were discussing the idea of picking up a legacy game, and I was saying, well, we could do something like Pandemic Legacy Season 1, which is the #2 overall game right now. It's basically the first ever legacy game. They kind of invented the concept of a legacy game with Pandemic Legacy Season 1. Or we could go with something else. I said, I would love to do Gloomhaven, but it's expensive and it's huge. It's #1, so I'm sure it's amazing, but I'm not really up for running something so big because I don't want it to completely overtake our Friday night gaming sessions where that's all we're playing for the next 6 months. That would kind of be a bummer. So Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion is like a truncated version of Gloomhaven. It's 25 unique scenarios. It's a legacy system, so you're going to be unpacking new cards that you've never seen before as you make your way through the game. You're going to be putting stickers on things. You're going to be tearing other things up. Permanent changes to the game, so no replayability, but an amazing experience. 25 scenarios, so if we do one every Friday, give or take a couple of missed Fridays due to people having to call out for certain things, we can easily get through this in about 6 months. And because it's a truncated version of the game, we can get through a session in between 1.5 hours to 2 hours. So if we start our night at 6:30 or 7 o'clock, we can be done this between 8:30 and 9, and then jump onto another board game or two and still be done by midnight. So this won't eat up our entire session, though we can begin every evening with it and continuously move through the scenario. So very excited to give this a try. We might be starting this as early as this week, but probably sometime in January is when we'll be beginning this, and I might start giving you guys sort of week-to-week updates on how this is going, or maybe even just include an update in my gaming reviews. But yeah, excited to give this a try. So that is everything that I grabbed. Like I said, nothing outside of the top 25, which I'm really excited about. Very excited to give a lot of these a try. The ones that I have tried, Spirit Island, Concordia, Terraforming Mars, have been a ton of fun, and I can't wait to jump into the other ones. So, like I said, I hope you guys had a great holiday as well. I hope you got some cool stuff, or got to play some cool stuff, or at least got to see your family in one way or another. I hope everybody's had a good new year so far, and I will be back with reviews probably this week. Like I said, I'm working on one for Gravwell, Escape from the Ninth Dimension from Renegade Game Studios. That will be out shortly. I just have a little bit more filming to do and some editing on that. But other than that, I will see you guys in the next one. Have a good night.